All right, here we go. We are in our second to last week of the historical overview here. This week we're looking at this period from 1300 till 1699, one of the most action-packed periods in the church's history. So today we're looking at 1300 till 1499. 1499 brings us to the eve of the Protestant Reformation, but not quite there. So we're going to look at some of the things that happened in the church during this time period, which at least indirectly contributed to the Protestant Reformation. So weak leaders and schism gives you a little bit of an idea of what we're looking at here. So this 200-year period sees a big-time decline in the authority and the prestige or the respect given to the Pope. All right. We're going to see several reasons for that. The two main ones include what's called the Avignon papacy, which we will talk about more later, but Avignon, France. So the Avignon papacy is this period of about 70 years where the popes are no longer residing in Rome, but instead are living in Avignon, France. They become influenced by the French government, the French monarchy. And so there's a lot of respect lost, a lot of authority lost. Basically, the independence of the church is compromised because it's very closely aligned with the French government. And then after that, you get what's called the Western Papal Schism. And this is where we're going to see two and then eventually three different people claiming to be Pope. And nobody knows who the real Pope is. So, of course, there's confusion, there's division over the papacy. And so the church, again, this lasts for decades. And so the church is forced to basically operate without an effective Pope for several decades. Okay. So we'll talk more about those. You also get proto-Protestants. So proto means first. So these are like the forerunners of the Protestant reformers like Martin Luther and John Calvin. Jan Hus and John Wycliffe start proposing things that are considered heretical. They're both condemned as heretics during this time period, but their teachings become influential and will kind of sow the seeds for the Protestant Reformation in the next century after them. You also get the heresy of conciliarism, which is the idea that church councils are superior to the Pope and that they have more authority than the Pope. Problems arise from this. So think about, all right, if councils are superior to the popes, well, then what makes a council legitimate versus illegitimate? Okay, how many bishops are required to be there? Is there a percentage of bishops that have to be there in order for the council to be legitimate or not? So there become problems, especially with the question of what makes a council legitimate versus what's called a robber council, which there were several of, especially in the early centuries. It's a council that has no actual authority but pretends to be an authoritative council. So eventually this gets settled in favor of the Pope as the head of the church, as Scripture defines Peter's role. And of course, a council has legitimacy if it is done in union with the Pope. Okay, so we'll hash that out a little bit more. The Renaissance happens during this time period, and so you get several artistic and architectural achievements. In literature, you've got Dante writing the Divine Comedy in 1315. That's Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso. You'll read that next year in world literature. Geoffrey Chaucer writes the Canterbury Tales, which you'll probably read at some point during Brit Lit this year. Gutenberg invents the printing press, and that, of course, revolutionizes the way that books are made and copied. The Sistine Chapel is built, and then, of course, painted by a variety of Renaissance artists, most famous being Michelangelo. And then The Last Supper, painted by Leonardo da Vinci. Of course, he is an inventor and does a lot of other things as well. Honey, they went home. Sorry, it's my son. And then you also get humanism in this time period, which is basically a cultural or ideological shift where literature and the arts and philosophy, they're all looking at human experience and the human spirit in a way that's never really been done before. See, in the Middle Ages, the focus was on God and the next life. Okay, how do we get to heaven and avoid hell? Humanism is this new focus to what is it like to be a human being in this life. And so you get Dante is sort of looking at the human experience of hell, purgatory, and heaven. The Canterbury Tales is somewhat humanistic, is looking at the reality on the ground of what is it like to be a pilgrim and what is happening in the church right now. So you get this shift to a more modern way of thinking, basically, which is focusing on human experience and what it means to be a human being. Go ahead and pause this. Do question 1. All right, these are some pictures of the Sistine Chapel. So on the left, you've got the whole east side of the Sistine Chapel. Gives you a huge overview of the place. Painting covers all the walls and the ceiling. In the middle, you get a glimpse of the ceiling that was painted by Michelangelo, which is just extraordinary. It looks three-dimensional. And then on the right is Michelangelo's depiction of the Last Judgment. These are all from Wikimedia Commons. So if you go on Wikipedia, you can find these there. All right. Major events in this time period. From 1309 to 1378 is the period of the Avignon papacy. Basically, Pope Clement V ends up leaving Rome to escape political controversies. There's a chaotic political situation in Rome. The Pope wants to get out. He moves to Avignon, France, and the popes end up being there for the next 70 years. So, like I said, the French crown becomes very influential. French cardinals in electing the next popes and so on. So for 70 years, even though the Pope was still the Bishop of Rome, he's not living in Rome. Okay, so the church loses some independence there. Eventually, in 1377, St. Catherine of Siena convinces Pope Gregory XI to return to Rome. Okay, so the next year he returns to Rome. This is the end of the Avignon papacy. But it's Catherine, who is obviously a layperson. She's a woman. She is a third-order Dominican, but she's not even part of consecrated life. Very active. She's a mystic, politically involved, and so on. But nevertheless, she, of all people, is the one to convince the Pope to return to Rome. It's kind of remarkable. And then you get, for the next several decades, what's called the Western Papal Schism. Okay, so Gregory returns to Rome, then he dies, and the cardinals in Rome elect Pope Urban VI. However, Urban ends up being a much stricter reformer than the cardinals wanted. So they end up changing their mind, saying, man, I wish we hadn't elected Pope Urban VI. So they go then back to Avignon, I believe, and they elect a new pope, Clement VII. Even though Urban VI is a legitimate pope, now you've got this anti-pope, Clement VII. So two popes, and the cardinals actually want Clement to be the pope. All right. Then you get what's called the Council of Pisa in 1409, which attempts to settle the whole thing by deposing Urban VI and Clement VII and then electing Alexander V. However, everybody is aware that the Council of Pisa had no authority because no pope was involved in calling it. So there's no authority for it to do this. Now you simply have three rival popes, okay? One legitimate pope and then two anti-popes. Nobody really knows who the legitimate pope is. Of course, there can only be one real pope at a time, but nobody knows who that is. There's a lot of confusion. A lot of people are divided along national lines, okay? It's finally settled through the Ecumenical Council of Constance. All right, this council comes together. It's got the support of one of the claimants to the papacy. Two of the popes agree to step down, and then the third one, everybody just withdraws their support, and they say, no, this guy's not actually the pope. Okay, so that levels the playing field, clears the field, really. So now there's no pope, and then the council elects Martin V as the legitimate pope, and everybody kind of agrees on that. Okay, so that's ultimately how the papal schism was settled. Two of the popes step down. One of them loses all of his supporters, and the Council of Constance elects the next guy. And then you get the Council of Florence, which follows shortly after that. And the Council of Florence then condemns the heresy of conciliarism and says, no, the Pope is supreme over the councils. And in fact, no council is legitimate unless it is confirmed by the Pope. And in fact, unless it is called by the Pope, presided over by him or a representative of his, and confirmed by the Pope. Okay, that's the only way you can know if a council is legitimate or not. And then at the end of this, or almost at the end of this period, something in the East happens where Constantinople finally falls to the Ottoman Turks. The last we talked about the East was in relation to the Crusades. So the Crusader kingdom collapses, and then the Ottoman Turks end up beating on the door of the Byzantine Empire more and more and more. Eventually, they take Constantinople, and the Byzantine Empire is no more. That's the end of the old Eastern Roman Empire. Okay. So that's a huge thing in the East. It also means the Turks now are going to invade Europe. Okay. And we'll talk about that probably in the next couple of days. So pause, answer question 2, and then we'll move on. All right, this is the Palace of the Popes in Avignon, France. You can still go visit it. So you can see why the popes were quite comfortable here. This is a spectacular palace. Okay, so yeah, they were treated well by the crown of France, and they didn't really want to leave this. So anyway, you can still visit that. All right, major people and saints, we'll wrap this up. Pope Clement V is the guy who moved the papacy to Avignon, France. Catherine of Siena is the one who convinced the Pope to return. But like I said, she was also a mystic and a spiritual writer. She wrote, her dialogues are still an outstanding piece of spiritual writing. A political influencer, so she's a remarkable woman. Pope Gregory XI then is the Pope who moved back to Rome. John Wycliffe and Jan Hus are a couple of heretics who basically set up the Protestant Reformation with their theology. St. Joan of Arc is during this time period. So she led an army to liberate parts of France from the English invaders. She ended up getting tried for heresy because she claimed to have some private revelations, and several doctors and bishops investigated it. They found no grounds for charging her with heresy, but their testimony was not permitted at her trial as far as her defense goes. So she ends up being condemned for heresy and burned at the stake in 1431. You also get Renaissance writers, artists, architects, inventors. So those guys we mentioned. Raphael is a painter. Thomas More was a humanist writer. And Erasmus of Rotterdam actually ends up getting in debates with Martin Luther in the next time period. All right. Christopher Columbus also discovers the New World. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's going to actually change a lot of things as well. So big time events, major people. Go ahead and do question 3. And then you know the drill. All right. Looking forward to tomorrow. We get to talk about the Protestant Reformation. The day after that, we do the Catholic Counter-Reformation, and then we will have our quiz on Thursday. All right. Hope you're all doing well, especially those in quarantine. And we'll be back tomorrow.